Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Backlog Bunker. At the risk of this becoming another Yakuza rant, we gotta talk about Judgment. If you couldn't tell, I can be a very vindictive person, and sometimes I wonder if there were times that I was too mean in the past, but I absolutely do not feel this way about my Yakuza fan rants from a few episodes ago, because I keep proving myself right. I really shouldn't have listened to the people who told me to try Judgment because it was the best real-time Yakuza combat, aside from its sequel obviously, because I was fooled into playing a bad game yet again. What I have to remind myself is that when Yakuza fans talk about what makes Yakuza combat bad, they are not talking about the same things that I'm talking about. I should have learned this from the backlog bunkers I did on Yakuza all that time ago, because everything that I brought up that was bad about the games, I had people responding to me, bitching and moaning, going like, yeah, well those things don't really matter though. Who cares that group fights suck dick? Haven't you played the bowling minigame? And so even Judgment, which is a better game because the combat is an improvement from other Yakuza games, it still has all the same lows because no one can identify what makes the bad parts of these games bad. I've always said that Sonic fans have the lowest standards in the video gaming industry, but they might have been supplanted by Yakuza fans now, which is ironic because they're both Sega. Sonic fans have bad standards because every time we get a bad game in the series, people cope about it because good games in the series exist, which Sega does bank on because that's how they promoted Sonic Forces. But with Yakuza fans, they have no excuse because they don't have any leg to stand on. I have not played a good Yakuza game that wasn't the RPGs. Even Kiwami 2, which I largely liked, I'm starting to reconsider because it was a fancy new engine coming off of Kiwami 1, and I'm starting to wonder if the only reason I like Kiwami 2 is because its bad points were not the same thing as Kiwami 1's bad points. Me liking Kiwami 1 over 0, just because of the fact that sub-stories weren't literally pointless, shows just how low the bar was for me. Here's hoping that's the last time I ever have to interact with this series, and that RGG doesn't end up making a fucking Knuckles spin-off game, and I end up having to play that. Unfortunately, the other thing I wanted to talk about this week didn't fare any better than Yakuza, and that's Resident Evil. Through my friend's Steam library, I've had access to most Resident Evil games, and after realizing I didn't like survival horror, the only thing I really had left on my to-do list was 4, obviously. I still didn't expect to like it very much, but to my surprise, I thought it was actually kinda good. I didn't play all that much of it, but from what I did play, I had fun, which is not something I can say about every other game in the series. On the one hand, this is a positive thing because it means I don't have to write off the entire Resident Evil franchise, but on the other hand, it means that I'm definitely going to be skipping out on 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, Code Veronica, really any of the games people actually like, aside from 4, of course, leaving me only 5 and 6 left to play, which are not as well liked. Despite this, at the insistence of this same friend, I did try 7, and unsurprisingly, I hated it. I'm honestly a little surprised they had me try it at all, when the first 30 minutes of the game is a walking simulator, and then, even when the game starts up proper, it's just the same survival horror bullshit that everyone who knows me knows I don't like. So naturally I dropped it and then moved on to Resident Evil 8, which leaned in a better direction for me because it was more action heavy than survival horror, but it was still survival horror, even if it was easier. I played 8 because a different friend said I'd probably like 8 because it's more linear and action heavy, which is why I would probably like it. But what people seem to not understand about me is that when I say I don't like these elements, I don't mean I don't like certain versions of these elements, I mean I do not like these elements. Linear survival horror is still survival horror. Just because you make a game that only has a few rooms to check, or whatever room you have to check next is really obvious, doesn't mean it's not a game about checking rooms. I don't want the survival horror elements toned down, I don't want them altered, I want them removed. Obviously, I don't mean from Resident Evil as a series, because I've accepted that that's just not going to be the series for me, and people can enjoy whatever they enjoy. I just want people to stop recommending me survival horror games, because the next one you recommend me is not going to be the one that turns me. I've been playing video games for 17 years now. You're not going to put me in front of Metroidvania, and then I'm suddenly going to be like, oh, I get it now. It's just not going to happen. This isn't to say my tastes will never change. As a kid, I probably wouldn't have liked XCOM very much. The point is that no game's gonna change my mind. My tastes will just evolve naturally over time, as they do with any person. What's not gonna happen is that I play a game, and then I suddenly have a revelation that makes me think completely differently about a genre that I've hated for God knows how long. If I hadn't gone on that rant just now, this would have been a more natural transition, but the weekly topic for this week is, how does the series know what elements to keep for future entries? I mentioned earlier that I don't want the Resident Evil games to change for me, because I'm not going to play the Resident Evil game, so it doesn't matter to me. But this doesn't mean Capcom doesn't think the same way, because Resident Evil 4 itself was a big shift for the series at the time. This is technically part of a bigger topic I'm going to cover at some point, so I'll try not to go too broadly, but at the time, 4 was massive, and so 5 and 6 obviously kept the action focus, but then 5 and 6 weren't as well liked, so they made 7, which went back to way more of a survival horror focus, but they clearly still liked 4, so they went to 8, which did the action stuff on top of the survival horror stuff, but again, they still liked 4 a lot, so when 9 came out, they just kind of threw up their hands, I guess, and made half the game survival horror and half the game Resident Evil 4, protagonist and all. So what I want to know is what makes Capcom keep trying to go back to 4 in some way, because people clearly liked the survival horror return. That's what made 7 and 8 so popular. And yes, 4 is a massive game in the series, but 3 was also pretty popular amongst Resident Evil fans until 3 Remake came out and they cut out half the game. In my opinion, the general idea with iterative game design is you cut out the bad parts and you keep all the good parts, but then obviously this varies from company to company. Insomniac chooses to keep the bad parts but try to make them more tolerable to people. Sonic Team chooses to throw out any game that even has any bad parts in it. Unless it's a wild runaway success, Game Freak tends to just not keep any of the good things and regard them as gimmicks that are per game. So I do find it interesting to look into what might be the game development philosophy behind any individual company, or sometimes any individual person, though it does occasionally mean ending up with series that just don't go in directions that I enjoy, whether they be ones that I don't like Resident Evil, or ones that I try to like Sonic. I have to admit I'm a little bit jealous of Resident Evil fans, because they consistently get games that they enjoy, even the remakes. Meanwhile, when it comes to some of my favorite series, a remake of one of my favorite games of all time is, if it's lucky, kind of good. And I don't even know if I'd say good as much as enjoyable. But that's it for this week. Get out of here.